Jai Sai Ram to all. In today's class, we will be talking about the structure and the function of nephron, which is the most important question from life processes for your boards. So here we go. Just look upon the video completely so that you understand the topic. The very first part of the video, I'll be explaining about the structure of nephron. So if you could see, you know that our body is made up of cells, and cells are the basic structural and functional unit of any living organism. Similarly, for a kidney, the structural and the basic unit of the kidney are these nephrons. What are these called as? Nephrons. So if we will be talking about these nephrons, there are millions of nephrons which are intact in the kidney, and one of the nephron structure, if we will be talking about the structure of the nephron, this is the structure of the nephron. If I divide the structure of the nephron can be broadly divided into two categories. Or the structure of the nephron, that is renal corpuscle, and the next one is the renal tubule. This will make the understanding of the structure of nephron very easy to you. So I'll revise that nephron is made up of two important parts, or we will be dividing the structure of nephron into two important parts. The very first is the renal corpuscle, followed by the renal tubule. The very first, if I talk about, I am giving the name of the parts, as the diagram of the nephron is also very important and you need to draw. I have taken the very basic structure so that it is easy for you to draw. You can take the screenshot after I label so that you know the parts as well. So the very first renal corpuscle is made up of these two parts, the 1 and the 2. If you could look upon the one is the double-walled cup-shaped like structure. This is something like cup, the first one, and it's double-walled. So I'll say it as double-walled cup-like structure. And what I'll call this double cup-like structure, I'll call it as Bowman's capsule. What will I call it as? Bowman's capsule. And the second are the microscopic cluster of capillaries. I hope you know what are capillaries. The one cell thick further versions of arteries and veins are the capillaries, and these microscopic capillaries are termed as glomerulus. What are they termed as? Glomerulus. So the first, the double-walled cup-like structure, is the Bowman's capsule, followed by the second, the thin-walled capillaries situated inside the Bowman's capsule are the glomerulus. So yes, we will divide renal corpuscle, or the structure of the nephron, the renal corpuscle, into two parts. And what are those two parts? As I said, the first part is the Bowman's capsule, followed by the second part, that is the glomerulus. The next structure in which we have divided the nephron is this convoluted tube-like structure, and we have called it as convoluted tubule. We also call it as convoluted tubule. So this renal tubule has three important divisions, and that is this third one. It's a part of this tube which is coiled and twisted. The fourth one, and this part is the fifth one. So this renal tubule has brought three divisions according to the class 10th standard. So the third division is PCT. So we will call third as PCT, and the PCT stands for proximal convoluted tubule. Why we call it as proximal convoluted tubule? Because this is the starting of the renal tubule, the part of the nephron. So the starting of the nephron, we are calling it as PCT, that is proximal convoluted tubule. Then you could have a look upon this U-shaped structure. This U-shaped structure is the fourth part, which is called as Henle's loop. We call it as Henle's loop. So the fourth part of renal tubule is Henle's loop, followed by the fifth part. It's also a convoluted tubule, and the end of this convoluted tubule is called it as DCT. Here D stands for distal convoluted tubule. last, which is neither the part of this renal corpuscle and renal tubule, we have this structure, this thin tube-like structure, that is the sixth one, and we will call it as collecting duct. What we will call it as? Collecting duct. So basically, these 6 parts together make up the structure of nephron. And what are these 6 parts? We will revise again. The first nephron is divided into 2 categories, renal corpuscle and renal tubule. This 1 and 2, this double cup-like structure is called as Bowman's capsule, in which there are microscopic thin-walled capillaries, which are called as glomerulus. Together make the renal corpuscle, followed by the renal tubule. This tube-like structure, which is coiled, is termed as renal tubule, which is divided into 3 parts according to class 10. That is the third part, called as PCT, since it is the starting part of this coiled tube. We have called it as proximal convoluted tubule. Towards the last, we have this U-shaped cup-like U-shaped structure, which we have called it as Henle's loop. Followed by the last part of this convoluted tubule, we have called it as distal convoluted tubule. And the last, we have an end structure called as collecting duct, where urine is collected. So now we will be talking for the second part of the nephron, that is the function of nephron. How these components work. Okay, since we have already talked about the structure of nephron, and I hope that's clear to you, we will be moving ahead with the function of nephron. Now, what is the function of nephron? What actually it does? I hope the structure and the various components of nephron are clear to you. Now we will understand what are the functions of these components. So when the blood comes into this nephron, the first it enters these glomerulus. These glomerulus are the cluster of thin capillaries. So when the blood at high pressure enters these glomerulus acts like sieve. Do you know what is sieve? Channi, जो हमारी kitchens में होती है. Same function it works as that of a sieve. Now what does the sieve do? If I pass the tea from the sieve, the tea leaves and all the solid big components will left in the sieve, and the remaining tea will pass from the sieve into the cup. So whenever we do this filtration process, we use these 2 terms. The solid material which is left on the sieve, we will call it as residue. What we call it as residue. And the clean product which is passed from the sieve, that is the tea. If I am taking the example of the tea, it is called as filtrate. So these 2 terms must be clear to you, that is the residue and the filtrate. So understand the process. When the blood is entering this glomerulus, it is at very high speed. All the big components will just get entangled over there, will not be allowed to pass. And the remaining blood which is passed from the glomerulus contains small molecules dissolved in it, and we call that blood which is passed from the glomerulus is called as the glomerular filtrate. What is it called as? Glomerular filtrate. So I will be explaining about this functioning of nephron, dividing them into 3 components which will make it easy for you to understand. The very first process we will be talking about is the filtration, which is occurring in the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule, as we were discussing. The second, I'll divide the work of the tubule into selective reabsorption. What I'll call it as selective reabsorption. And followed by the third part is the tubular secretion. That is tubular secretion. So in these 3 parts, we can divide the functioning of nephron. It's very easy. It seems to be complicated, but it is very easy. So the blood which is coming at very high speed is passing through this glomerulus. The big molecules are entangled over there, and the clean filtrate, that is the glomerular filtrate, is passed further into our convoluted tubule. This much working, which I have explained till now, comes under the heading of filtration. Second function which we have divided is the selective reabsorption. As the word suggests, selective reabsorption. So selected molecules will be reabsorbed. the glomerulus filtrate or the glomerular filtrate passed from the glomerulus, now it contains some useful as well as some non-useful substances. Useful substances like which our body needs it. Some sodium ions, water, salts, amino acids, while there are some non-useful substances like urea, creatinine. So now this convoluted tubule will do the process of selective reabsorption. All the useful substances will be reabsorbed, whereas all the non-required substances will be removed from the tubule, from the nephron. So the maximum reabsorption in the nephron occurs in PCT. PCT stands for proximal convoluted tubule. Three important parts: proteins, amino acids and glucose, that is the maximum reabsorption, occurs in this PCT. Followed by we have this U-shaped structure. So till here these three important substances are reabsorbed in our nephron, that is proteins, glucose and amino acid. Followed by this U-shaped structure. We know that this U-shaped structure is Henle's loop. Now what is the function of this Henle's loop? It is also responsible for reabsorption. Now reabsorption of water and salts occur at this place, that is the U-shaped Henle's loop. Now the glomerular filtrate will pass to this DCT, that is the end of the convoluted tubule. Now this DCT, that is distal convoluted tubule, is responsible for removing what? Creatinine and urea, which our blood does not need, and maximum reabsorption of water, which our body can reabsorb, which our nephron can reabsorb, takes place in DCT. And this DCT has two important functions. First, it will absorb the maximum amount of water. Second, it will remove creatinine and urea, which our body does not require. So all the waste material which our nephron thinks that it cannot be reabsorbed, it is not required by our body, is further sent to this collecting duct. So this collecting duct sends the urine, and urine contains what? Urea, creatinine, some excess salts and the water which our body do not need. So all these constituents together make our urine. The urine is passed from the collecting duct to the ureter, and ureters are responsible for sending the blood to the urinary bladder. So this is the functioning of the nephron, which is responsible for removing the nitrogenous waste from the body.